Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of I'm Not Even Supposed to Be Here Today, a conversational, cultural savvy podcast for folks trying to make sense of a world that has absolutely gone sideways. We're here to unpack the issues that boggle our minds, all rooted in a little history, a little culture, a little humor, a little group therapy, and a little humility. I am your host, Chris Bevelo, owner of Bearing 287, an organization that is fighting the good fight to make the world a better place for all, and the sponsor of the show. I'm joined by my co-host Des, who is a social impact comm strategist by day and who spends her nights mixing history and remixing history, making history, remaking history. You're doing a lot with history, Des, to help yourself make sense of the present. How are you doing?
You know, I'm just navigating the chaos as we do. I mean, everything just feels like it's going off the rails every single day. So,
that's an inside joke. We'll have to explain that later. Yeah, the irony for me today is so rich. We are recording this on January 7th, late in the afternoon, which is the day that there was an ICE shooting in Minneapolis. I don't know how to put it. It didn't lead to the death. Like a protester was shot to death by ICE, which everybody by the time they hear this is going to know a lot about. It actually, the irony is it dovetails almost perfectly with what we're going to cover anyway, but we certainly did not want to have to start our episode with such awful, somber crap like that, because that's what it is. Awful, somber crap.
and that as they continue to essentially take on different cities, you know, we're experiencing this like all across the country. And it's wild. It's like you're watching this little thing, this amoeba across the map take over, and it's like, what are we supposed to do? You know, are we just here watching this unfold? And I don't know. It just like I experienced it this summer in Chicago. Friends experienced it in DC. Some other friends have been experiencing it in New Orleans. And I didn't even realize they were up in Minneapolis. And so it's just like, how do you even keep track of all of this? But, you know, to our conversation earlier, the fact that it happened, you know, right where George Floyd was murdered, which was a catalyst for a different thing 6 years, 5.5, 6 years ago, right? And here we are, the pendulum has swung all the way back to the other side. So how do we make sense of this? When it's not...
Go ahead.
No, but it's like... In a way, we're almost kind of tired of just making sense of it, right? It's like, what do we do about it?
You know? Well, that's what our topic is. But before we get to that, I mean, the deja vu-ness of it all, having lived in the Twin Cities for, 30 years now, plus 30 years. So here in 2000, I guess, 2020, for George Floyd, having visited the George Floyd Memorial. And, you know, I knew Trump was going to be here with his ICE folks because they announced, thanks to the Somali childcare fraud brouhaha, which is actual fraud, but not Somalian, though there are obviously Somalians involved in it. Turns out that the head of the organization that did the most fraud was a white woman, but we'll just leave that to the side. They announced they were going to send 2,000 more agents. They've already been here. So kind of like New Orleans and some other places, they've been here. But they announced because of that, they were going to send in 2,000 agents. This was earlier this week in what they called the largest immigration operation ever. And so I don't know, we're on day, I don't think even all the agents are here. And we already have a shooting, completely unnecessary, I would argue unjustified shooting. Of course, there's enough ambiguity that people will argue it was justified. Why didn't she just comply? Why didn't she get out of the car? All that kind of stuff. We're not going to get into all that now. But yeah, it does raise the question, which we're going to address, of what the hell do you do? In this day and age, what do you do? And this is really personal to me, Des, because I left my career in healthcare marketing to start a new chapter. And this podcast is part of the new chapter. I'm founding a new business that's going to be all about trying to make the world a better place. And one of the ways I've described kind of the urgency and passion I have for this is I'm tired of just talking about stuff, and I really want to do something. I really want to make the world a better place and not just yap about it. I want to do something. But what is doing, right? And so that's what we want to talk about. And in particular, one way that you can show up. So I think we should dive in on that.
Yeah. And so I've gone through phases of doing something. Like I started to cut my teeth in activism. This was back in 2006, 2007, right? When I was living in Las Vegas, I was very much involved in advocacy work in the state of Nevada. But then once I moved, back home to Tennessee, it kind of felt a little daunting. And so I took a step back, and just these last several years, I've just been kind of focused on like living life and work and what have you. But there's been something that's been bubbling up here recently. And it's around that, what are we supposed to do? And in some ways also thinking about like, okay, like how do I take things, matters into my own hands? Am I supposed to? So around that that idea that's been kind of bubbling up in my head, I got a question for you, Chris. Have you ever seriously considered running for office?
Not seriously. It is interesting though, because in describing what I'm doing in my next chapter, as I told a few people about it in the fall, I had a handful say before I could tell them what I was doing. I said, I kind of want to give back. I've really benefited from our system. I need to give back. I want to take action, make the world a better place. And they said, "Are you running for office?" And I kind of laughed. I was like, "No. So but to be fair, it's crossed my mind, but I don't think I'm cut out for political office. I have no patience for it. You and I have seen The Wire. We know how politics really works, Des, which isn't fair because we're going to talk about politics and how to get into it. But I'm not sure that's a path for me. But who knows? Maybe after this podcast, I'll have a change of heart. What about you?
Yeah, it's come up in the back of my mind throughout the years, and like I've always ultimately ended up in a like, oh God, no, But I had a couple of months ago, I had attended the Pissed Off Optimists, their Livid Con here in Chicago.
Wait, stop. That is the best branding. Both of those things, Pissed Off Optimist, just like blows your mind. But Livid Con, that is incredible. I love it. You might have to tell people what the hell that is because it sounds so cool.
Yeah, so Livid Con, this was the first year that they'd done this. So this was created by a design group here in Chicago, and they just started to host happy hours of just people, within their design world of just kind of coming together. And we're tired, kind of like what we're talking about right now. We're like, I'm tired of just sitting around watching this. Like, what can we do? How can I find some hope in this? And at least getting together with community provides that. But it started to actually kind of expand from there. People had heard about it, so they started hosting different pissed off happy hours, or I guess they're called angry hours, in different cities, which then led to having a conference where you kind of brought everybody together. I had heard about it from a friend of mine. She leads some social impact design or civic design company out of the Bay Area, and she was coming into town for it, and she's like, hey, you should attend this. But one of the topics, there was a number of plenaries and, kind of fireside chat conversations, but one of them was this presentation by a woman, a designer who had ran for office, right? And her presentation was about like, hey, you should all consider running for office. And it always feels like it's this thing that's like over here that only other people can do. And a lot of times coming out of elections, both parties are always talking about like, oh, if you don't like what you see, run for something, and then I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, I don't think I'm built for that, but like, why? Why is that? Why wouldn't I be built for that? So that kind of gets us into the question around, okay, And when we're thinking about everything that's going on, and it's like, okay, what is our role in that? And there's a number of different ways that you had mentioned that we can get into it, but I would really love to just kind of unpack the idea of running for office. So, like, what's kind of your thoughts, just knowing that?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? There's kind of a spectrum of ways to get involved, right? And I think you and I had some fun talking about like that spectrum. There's one spectrum that is like grab your pitchfork. I guess that would be Luigi would be the example of that we are not advocating or condoning in any way, going out and committing violence that way. All the way over to maybe the other end of the spectrum, which I've spent a lot of time on this other end of the spectrum, which is sitting on your couch, bitching and moaning about things you don't like. And so, the political route is probably it's further away from the couch because it feels so big. It feels so like, oh my gosh, like how in the world would you do that? And because you see how much money is needed, and you see, I don't know, it just seems like this big thing. And to your point earlier, it's a big thing that's over there. I think most people don't ever even consider doing that. But I think we've got a few examples that we might want to get into of folks that have done that. Even culturally, we could talk about, Jimmy Stewart. Wow, Mr. Smith going to Washington, right? Like it goes all the way back to that. That's my Jimmy Stewart. Well, Mary, I'm going to run for the Senate, Mary.
Hell.
Sorry. What? Come on. If you've seen It's a Wonderful Life, that's not bad.
It's not bad.
Well, I'll lasso the moon for you, Mary. And I'll get you that school board seat.
You're out of control.
All right, I'll stop now. I'll stop. Sorry. But yeah, like we got Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. We've got kind of a history in pop culture anyway of folks that are portrayed as these kind of average Joe or Jolenes that have decided they're going to run for office. Sometimes incidentally, like the movie Dave. Have you ever seen the movie Dave?
I haven't. I remember it. I remember it being like on the premium movie channels back in the 90s, but I don't think I ever watched it.
It's a good movie. It probably doesn't what's the word when something doesn't stand the test of time? Age well?
It doesn't hold up. Yeah, it doesn't age well.
It doesn't age well not because it's like there's gratuitous bad stuff in it. It's just going to look like an 80s movie. Like my kids will run for the hills if you ever try to play them like Dave. They'd be so goddamn bored by something like that. But Dave is an example of somebody who kind of accidentally becomes the president of the United States. He's just a normal dude. But because he's a normal dude, he can actually kind of do things in an authentic way, right? That a politician normally wouldn't do. And then the only other one I can think of, though there's a lot more, Parks and Rec. Did you watch Parks and Rec?
I did.
I did
Good
not.
Pawnee.
I did
You
not.
didn't?
No, I mean, like I had to literally look up the show, like what the purpose of. I knew it was about like the
Did
group
you
that runs
black
Parks and
out
Recreation.
for? You, you completely
No,
missed.
I'm going to put this out there, Des, and I know I'm going to get crap for it because my family gives me so much crap for it because it sounds so ridiculous and elitist. I can't stick with comedies. I can't. Like the last comedy I watched season after season was The Office, right? And there are exceptions. Like I watched the first season of Ted Lasso, and I watched. I love The Studio, as you well know, as we've talked about in the past. But like when it comes to these network things that just go, I can't do it. I don't know why. I just don't. They don't hold my interest.
All right. I mean,
So there you go.
Parks and Rec is basically a love child of the Office format, but okay.
I understand. I know that is the case. Same with Community, right? Like, but anyway, so we've got some stuff from pop culture we can pull from, but I think you've got some better examples that are a little more meaningful than Dave.
Yeah, I do. But I kind of want to backtrack a little bit because as I was thinking about, like, I mentioned my activism work in the past, and then I think about some documentaries and just like looking at the civil rights movement, and it's like the roles that each of us kind of play in this. More recently, it feels like everything is so focused on, like, I got to protest, right? Like everything is like, protest. And it's like, okay, there's a place for that. But when I think about the civil rights movement, there were different roles. So there was, government, being in office, right? And then you have leaders like, Martin Luther King, who was in communication with both, leaders of the free world, the alleged free world, but then he was also in communication with, he was right directly in the community, right? And so he essentially was using the people, the community, the protest as a way to pressure those in office to do the thing, right? But I feel like here recently we've lost kind of track or, lost the plot line, I guess, of protesting. It's like, who are we actually influencing versus like, am I doing this thing to feel good or what have you? So then I started thinking about like, well, who is in office that we can influence? And so to your point, I started thinking, especially given everything that has occurred last year, what you mentioned about Luigi Mangione and taking matters in his own hand. You got ICE agents and National Guards being deployed against their own American residents and citizens. And then meanwhile, we're using social media or have in the past for our activism and getting the word out. But now it's become this place of surveillance. And so then it's not even really safe to put that out because you might get, doxxed or what have you. And then in pop culture, we're seeing things. The movie Begonia, where essentially a conspiracy theorist kidnaps a tech CEO, one battle after another, shows activism rising up in violence, essentially creating, also looking at an example of an underground railroad for immigrants. And anyways, there's a lot of this, but like, where can we actually have a foothold in all of these different places and we're not just out in the streets, yelling? So that's what kind of got me thinking about the running for office. And then to your point, like, who are the average Joes, these people that are just deciding to run for office to make a difference because they can't stand it anymore? So, of course, there is the excitement that came from the Zohran Mamdani campaign for New York City mayor, which really felt fresh. And, this is a guy that decided like, hey, I'm going to do this. I have a point of view. I have a rally of folks that I'm trying to champion for this. And he came out. But what was really interesting about his particular campaign is that he came out with such a fresh take and a fresh, even just, so we're marketers, right? So we're always thinking about like, what's the brand of this? How are you kind of going to market essentially with your message? And he came with such an incredible like push. It reminded me of like, Obama in the past, right? But this was someone that was going up against the establishment. He was going up against the former, big names in the state of New York, in the city of New York, and then came out victorious, right? And so it gives you a little bit of inspo. Granted, I'm sure he has money and had some backing, but there are ways that we can kind of do this even on like little individual levels. But I'm kind of curious your thoughts there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm such a huge fan because, he's a social, democratic socialist who pissed off the right wing, but he also pissed off the establishment Democrats, which I love that. Like, so in other words, he was an equal opportunity pisser offer. So he's another example of somebody who was, I mean, before she won her congressional district, I don't know what she did, but I mean, she was super young, and she has risen to national prominence very quickly. In both these cases, and this is for another podcast, I would argue that what makes them both successful so far is authenticity in terms of their message and their voice. I even have an example of somebody that I mentioned to you before the show started. His name's Chris Kluwe. So Kluwe. You got to you either got to be a video game geek, you got to be a Minnesota Viking fan, or you got to be somebody who lives in Southern California. I know who Chris is, but he used to be a punter for the Vikings, great punter for years. But he was also a huge video game geek. So he would often show up on this podcast that I'd listened to out of the Twin Cities called Video Games Weekly. And that's where I got to really like him. And he's also very politically outspoken. And so once that podcast ended and, he's been done with the Vikings for years, I kind of lost track of him. But then I saw in the news, this was last year, that he committed an act of civil disobedience explicitly, where he lives in Huntington Beach now, and the city council was going to put up some horrifying plaque in the library that was literally like the MAGA tagline or something. And he went to the city council and he said, like, this is ridiculous and we shouldn't do this. And as a U.S. citizen, I am invoking my right to commit civil disobedience. And he went and he just sat down in front of the city council. So the police had to come and, he didn't resist. They just lifted him up, took him out. And I put that on my bucket list. And I'm like, I want to do that before I'm done. I want to commit civil disobedience. And that's the thing I can do. But here's an example. Now he's running for office. He's running for state assembly in California. So another example of somebody that really, he's a professional sports figure, quote unquote, but he's not Tom Brady, who, by the way, I will mention in the latest poll I saw for the 2028 presidential nominees on the Republican side, he was number six.
Tom Brady.
Tom Brady.
Oh my God. 80 for Brady is out here considering office.
I can't even imagine. But anyway, I don't put him in the camp of Tom Brady or LeBron James. He is a low-level professional athlete that most people would never know. But that's another example.
Yeah. So again, another example for me that has shown up as far as running for office outside of that LividCon was over the holiday over the holiday break. I watched the new James L. Brooks movie, Ella McKay. Had you heard of it? That movie?
No, and I don't know who James L. Brooks is either. Should I?
I feel like he's the same guy that did the oh my God, what was all of the big Jack Nicholson, huh?
No, go ahead.
I'm trying to think of the Jack Nicholson movie that came out, because what's coming to mind is like She's Gotta Have It, and it's a completely different movie.
Okay, well, keep talking and I'll look him up.
As good as it gets, there it is. He was the director for a lot of those, like kind of like in the Nora Ephron, like just there was a lot of clout around it.
Tears of Endearment. Terms of Endearment. I can't even read Spanglish.
Tears. Yes.
I felt tears of endearment watching that show. Sorry.
So there was a lot of I listened to an interview with Jamie Lee Curtis because I'm a Jamie Lee Curtis stan, and so I was like, oh, I'll go watch it. But it's kind of got mixed reviews. But he hadn't done a film in a while, and it was a dream of hers. But anyways, the movie was about this young woman in her 30s, and essentially the movie is about this woman navigating family dynamics. She's got like this philandering dad, this doting aunt played by Jamie Lee Curtis, and this brother who, I don't know, he may be on the spectrum, is kind of coded. So it was interesting to see how that played out. But there is this underlining message around, how do we choose to create change in our world? Now, she had been involved in politics, throughout her entire career. She got to law school. She'd made her way up to lieutenant governor in this. They didn't give a state. It was just kind of like anywhere USA. But the plot or the final message, essentially, without, spoiling it too much, was around the idea of hope, right? And that specifically, I was looking at like this woman who was never supposed to have like become governor. She became governor because the governor at the time got appointed to a federal cabinet position in whatever administration it was, because again, it was like a nameless thing. But she was only able to be like governor for a couple of like days because a scandal broke out and yada, yada, yada. But it ends with essentially she does find a way to make a difference, and she finds her way into like legal aid, right? And that she's able to create the change in her community that she wanted, and she tried to oppress other officials to do and pass some legislation, but she was able to get a lot of this done. But then it sent me down this whole other rabbit hole because I was like, who else has accidentally become governor?
Besides Dave.
And who just found themselves rising to the ranks. And it was Jan Brewer. I don't know why she came to mind, but like I started thinking about Jan Brewer, who former governor of Arizona. She essentially started in politics in the early 80s, mostly because she wanted to be more hands-on her children's education. But from there, she was able to, she ran for Arizona State House and won, which feels like what? Like she, again, didn't have a college education, didn't have a history in politics, just wanted to get involved. And so won her seat, had a POV, won her seat. Then went on to be majority whip, then went on to join the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, and then saw a seat open in the legislative, and then was able to come Arizona State. Like all of these things rise to the ranks until she got to basically, because she was the Secretary of State, when that governor at the time was appointed to a role in Obama's administration, she was all of a sudden front and center and was governor of Arizona, like literally out of nowhere. But the point here is that when you set your sights on something, even though it feels super nebulous and out of reach, you never know what you can actually achieve, right? I'm pretty sure she didn't have like, oh, I'm going to be governor out there. She's just like, it started with, I wanted to make a difference in my child's education. You get into a place, you see how things are run, and she's like, I have thoughts on how we can change taxation here. And then was able to gain, buy-in and leadership roles, throughout there. And so it started to make me feel like, maybe this is something that I can do. And that they always say, like, if you're thinking about running for office, start local, right? Because, like, to your point, we're like, oh, I'm just going to run for Senate or representative of my state. It's like, that feels super, like, out of nowhere because who are me? Who the hell am I to just all of a sudden run for, like, a federal office? But it could start with, school boards, assembly and state assembly, county commissioner, all these kinds of things. It just started to kind of just percolate something in my mind.
Well, hold that thought because we're going to go a little deeper into that. But so we've got Jeremy Stewart, we got Dave, we got Jan Brewer, we got AOC, we got Mondami, right? So we've got good examples of people that have done this, hopefully inspiring people. So here we are. What are we going to do with this information, Des, right? Because if today's tragedy wasn't yet another reminder we didn't need, shit has gotten real. Like, it's not getting real, it's gotten real. We're past the point. Like, if there was some line about it's time to, like, drop the pencil and pick up something else, that's a bad metaphor, right? Because I guess you go right to some other weapon. But stop yapping and do something, right? What are we going to do with all this?
Yeah, and it's thinking about kind of, meeting the moment where we are, and that it feels like we've lost, like the system is failing us. Institutions are failing us. We've lost trust in all the things. Who's going to take care of us, right? And beside, getting on a microphone, not us, but I mean, these acts of violence are happening, and not to mention, what's going on with Venezuela, right? And so anytime any of that happens, we keep asking, where's Congress? Who's doing something, right? And, we're all just kind of, John Q. Citizen, Jane Q. Citizen here. So we don't have, connectivity to what is actually being kind of spoken about in different back rooms. But if you get to a point where you feel like, let me in there to figure something out and be vocal about it and have that kind of a platform to do something, let me do that. So again, what we're experiencing is that, people are just feeling like, who is here? If ICE is shooting at us, who's protecting us? If we're looking at people that are in these, protective gear, then who's actually looking out for us? Mm-hmm. And then we get this, massive contradiction of, what we're all experiencing is that, essentially like the system is completely broken, but you got to work within the system. And there's electoral politics, but is that a really legitimate path? Because I'm not seeing any of them do anything, but also like, does my vote actually matter? They're gerrymandering all these different cities, they're changing. So it makes you feel like, it gives paralysis. So there's no wonder why most of us do just continue to sit on our couch, scroll on our phones, because there's too much information coming at us. So what in the hell are we supposed to do? And it's like thinking about like, okay, how can I just like narrow focus on where to go? And that's when I started thinking about there's activism, there is the running for office, there is all the things. But yeah, it just, how do we get out of that paralysis that we're experiencing when we're getting all of these messages all at once and all very, very loud?
Yeah, and I don't think I'm putting on a tin hat when I say a lot of that is intentional, right? We heard Steve Bannon years ago, before Trump won in 2016, say, "Look, the way you win the social media is you flood the zone with shit. You keep flooding the zone with shit, people can't keep up, and not only can they not keep up, they start just growing tired and weary of even paying attention, let alone doing something about all the stuff that's going on that is unlawful or goes against norms or puts a lot of people in a place of hurt. And there are a lot of people now. A lot of this is going across, political lines, right? So the answer is really to try to not drown in all of it and do something. So if we're talking about politics, Des, you already said this, but I think the best, if we're encouraging people, if you got any interest in this, don't just dismiss it out of hand. This is a legitimate path. And the best way to do this really is to start local, right? Because you're probably not going to be a Jan Brewer. You're not going to be Dave. You're not going to look like some national leader. You're going to be put in places as body double, and then that person disappears, and now all of a sudden you're the president. Like you got to be real about this. So you're going to have to start local. I think that is the best way to do it. And there's all kinds of ways to do that, but here's like 5 steps you can take. The first there's a lot of organizations and resources out there specifically focused on helping people consider politics for the first time, right? And so, there's all kinds of organizations. A few that we looked at and recommend: Run for Something. So just a quote here: since launching in January 2017, Run for Something has recruited nearly over 200,000 people across all 50 states, right? So that's for progressive leaders. And let's be honest, we're going to encourage people on the progressive side because that's who we are. She Should Run, which is an organization about women's representation and running for office, and Running Start, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit that trains young women to run for political office, right? So we'll provide links to all that. It's not a coincidence that 2 of the 3 of those, Des, are focused on women. At least it's not for me, because women are underrepresented in politics. And I am of the belief that, boy, could we use more women in politics. I'm trying to make sure I don't, men are idiots so often. My wife always loves to say like, oh, women can't do this or that because they're too emotional. She'll be like, give me a effing break. Men are the most emotional creatures you're ever going to meet. So, I mean, again, look at our president. He's just so fragile, right? We just invaded a country because he didn't win the Nobel Prize, and now he's not gonna let the democratically elected person who won the Nobel Prize take office because she got the Nobel Prize, not him. I mean, literally this week she went on a TV show and said, "I'll share it with him." Like, it's just gratuitous and awful, right? So, gotta get some more women in there. That's the first thing.
I would also add, for LGBTQ plus folks, there's the Victory Fund. They've been around for a number of years, and they have support for any folks that want to run for office that identify as LGBTQ plus as well. So yes, let's get some different people up in here, up in this office.
Let's do that. So step 2 would be figuring out where you want to start. And I guess it's probably obvious, but the recommendation is pick something you have passion about. So Jan Brewer really wanted to have more influence on the education her kids were getting, and that's where she started, right? So if you have kids and you care about the education they get, maybe it's a school board. Maybe you care about the environment. You want to join, here in the Twin Cities, for example, there's a parks board that's very influential. There's all kinds of ways to get started, but it really, if you're just going to go into it to get into it, you got to know what politics is. It's a lot of bureaucracy. It's a lot of diplomacy. It's a lot of bullshit. So you're not really going to do well tolerating all that if it's concerning something you really don't care about. So you got to start somewhere that you care about and feel like you can probably bring something to, even if it's just your passion. You don't have to have experience in it, but bring some passion to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you're going to go to the other steps?
I think you can go to number 3.
Number 3. And so, yeah, like the next couple steps, talk to those who are in these current roles, I guess depending on the size of your community, like when I was living in a smaller college town, a lot of these folks are actually really accessible, and I knew who they were, so you could have conversations with them. So, but even you as a constituent can reach out and say like, hey, like I live in your district, I'd love to chat with you, or even meeting folks that are within their administration or on their staff. But making a plan for that also kind of looks like going in observing so go to these meetings. A lot of these meetings are open to the public. Go see what the conversation is. And to, Chris's point, that'll give you some insight into like, how civil or how out of pocket, are these groups? Like, what are you actually in for? And some of these may not be as, over the top as you might see kind of play out on the federal and on the national level, right? So then make a plan, because a lot of these roles, a lot of these boards, these city councils, they go under contested. Mm-hmm. Folks aren't really thinking about them on that level and don't run against. So you get a lot of incumbents. But if you do have a POV, you might come in with something a little bit different. Talk to your friends, like let your folks know that this might be something that you're interested in, because you never know who has that connection, who has that experience that could then lend a hand. And then step 5 is just do it, put your hat in, just see what happens. It's not the end of the world if you don't necessarily get your seat, but what if you do, right? And then from there, you gain so much momentum from that. Actually, like, I won my seat. Like, what else can I do? I can actually make a difference here. But I mean, these are all steps. So like I said, this is something that is more accessible than you think, because it's not something we ever think about. Because when you're looking at that ballot, another example, did you ever watch the, Distinguished Gentleman? It was an Eddie Murphy movie from like the early 90s. Yeah. And essentially, he ran on the fact that his last name was the same last name as the incumbent that died. But no one really knew who that person was. They just, when you're looking at that ballot, you're just like, yep, I recognize that name. Yep, I recognize that name. And so he ran on the platform of the name I know it was like a movie, but still, like, but that movie has stuck. It was like one of my favorite movies as a kid. But it always just kind of stuck with me of like, yeah, none of us are really paying that much attention, which is an issue. But again, it's not that hard to get into it. So I know we talked quite a bit about politics, and you're probably thinking like, yeah, I hear you, but that ain't my thing. I'm not trying to do that. And we're always kind of conditioned to think that like the real power only comes from those elected officials. But there's some other roles that you can play. Because I know Chris had mentioned earlier about like, there's several different, but, going back to what he'd mentioned about like, what are you interested in? What are you passionate about? What are your skills? Think about that. So maybe you are more of an organizer. Maybe you're someone that just like, I love logistics. I love figuring this thing out. You might be a project manager. Then you could be a logistics person for phone banks, photo registration, mutual aid coordination, what have you. Let's say you have a strong, POV. Maybe you are like a Chris Bevelo, right? And you have like things to say. So you can be that citizen journalist, kind of like the different from the Ethan Hawke character in his latest show, as a truth seeker, truth sayer, or whatever.
No, I haven't seen that.
It's actually a really good show. But maybe you could be that person that's kind of, telling the story of what's going on in your community that maybe you feel like your local journalists aren't covering enough. Or maybe you're in a smaller town that doesn't have a a network, a news network, and you're like, I want to help tell the story. If you are a lawyer, you can, get involved with the ACLU or legal aid or what have you. Something else that just came to mind was, especially given the ICE incident today in the Minneapolis, is, documenting all of this. We're hearing more about this because there's usually someone out there with their phone that's recording. But let's say that you do have an eye for that, like as a photographer. You could show up to some of these things and capture the moment, the news, the international news in the way that we have it today. But the reason why we became more abreast of this was from the photography of what was going on, from the telling the story and that making its way back to the United States and us seeing this. And so that might be a way. And if I get it, you don't want to be like in the mess of it. You're not trying to be out here like a war reporter. You have a zoom lens, you have a long focal length, 700 millimeters. So you can maybe be somewhere safely away and taking photos of what is actually going on that can share that news. But again, these are just think outside of the box as far as, ways that you can have a role and play a part in this if you're feeling like I'm just tired of sitting on my couch and scrolling and doing nothing. Any other thoughts you had, Chris?
I've considered every single one of those, right? Like the next chapter that I have is in large part will be an amplifier. So really trying to get out there and spread the word on things I think are really important related to the causes I really believe in: social justice, human rights, all that good stuff. I almost went to law school and I considered it as my next chapter, right? Because I do feel like that is where you can have a really big impact on making the world a better place if you focus in the right area, civil rights attorneys, that kind of thing. But I just don't think I have the energy for that, Des. So I didn't pick that. I have more than thought than running for office is being the person behind the person who runs an office, being on the team, because one of my strengths, I think, is storytelling and packaging and being able to help, politicians really cut through with the right messages and not the bullshit consultant focus group nonsense that we get all the time, where, God bless him, but Hakeem Jeffries can talk for 5 minutes and not say a damn thing about anything, right? So is there a role there to play? And I guarantee you that in my next chapter, I'm going to be a disruptor, like Chris Kalui. I want to, I've been to protests. I want to go to more protests. Heck, my bucket list includes getting arrested for a misdemeanor for protesting in the right way, right? Hopefully, you never know what's going to happen, but I'm going to take that action too, right? So let's wrap it up. And what are the final words you've got for folks who are thinking about politics or otherwise, Des?
Yeah, I guess some of my final words are around, look at history. And a lot of times it's these folks that are doing these individual things that have led to the bigger thing. With the AIDS crisis, it's because of ACT UP. Folks were out there. Marriage equality came because of all of the work that activists have been doing. Civil rights came because of all that I shared before. But essentially, it is kind of like what you had outlined before, both of us had outlined before. It is figure out your role, figure out what you can do and do it. Match your energy with where it makes sense for you, what is important for you. And that, we're in relationship with each other. All of this is based on relationship. Find the helper. If you don't know off top, just look, like Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers and just lend a hand. You don't have to be a leader and all the things. Just be there, whether it's just putting up signs or helping people register to vote, picking up the elders to take them to go vote, progressive elders, that is. And then just looking for the tools, but that's kind of my takeaway. Do you have one, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's completely worthy to explore political office. I think more folks should do it. It's inspiring to know other organizations dedicated to that. And I'm guessing I will get involved in politics somehow, but probably not run for office. Because there's so many levers that can be pulled there, and there's so many people that I'd want to support, even if it's just door knocking, even if it's just, like you said, driving people to the polls, whatever it is, just got to go out and do it. Just got to do it. Just do it. All right. Let's wrap it. Let's wrap this episode. It's a good one, Des. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm inspired. Who knows? I might have to hire you if I'd consider running for office.
I'm
You can
here.
run my
I'm here
campaign,
for
the
it.
brand.
I'm here for it. Thank you all so much for joining us too, as well. We hope this helped you cope with today's news. I know you're listening to this on a different day, but I'm sure it'll have legs even when we post this. Unfortunately, that's the whole point of this podcast, to help people kind of cope. We're like a little microdose, Des. That's what I like to think. A little microdose for the day. Please like and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Spotify. That helps ensure more people can hear us. You can visit bearing287.com or follow me on Substack to access other helpful content that I mentioned earlier. And again, I'm Chris Bevolo on behalf of I'm Not Even Supposed to Be Here and Bearing 287. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.